So good morning, my name's Paddy Nixon. I'm the Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Canberra, and I'm here this morning to speak with Michelle Grattan about the week in politics. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi Paddy, another big week.
Another big week, yes, and I think if we just start by looking at that rather shocking news story from Monday of this week about the Liberal staffer, Brittany Higgins, who alleges rape in the offices of Minister Linda Reynolds by a fellow staffer back in March of 2019. This obviously has been immediately politicised. Scott Morrison has clearly come out on Monday saying he only heard about it then. And of course his critics, and in fact more broadly people are saying, is that really believable? I think if we begin by just looking at Brittany Higgins' position, she clearly knew that she would be in the media by coming out and making this very courageous statement. What she actually said about the incident.
She said that she and her fellow staffer went back to the office very late at night, that this was after a function, that she was very, very drunk, and that she sort of went to sleep, collapsed on the minister's couch, and the next thing she found that she was being raped. Now, the government at the time, or at least Linda Reynolds and her office at the time, tried to manage this incident, and the woman was given obviously the option of lodging a complaint with the police. She did speak to the police, though she did not lodge a complaint, and she stayed on in Linda Reynolds' office until after the election. Now, she says now that she felt pressured, that the choice was really between her career and pursuing this matter through the police. One can understand how she would feel like this, but in fact I think Linda Reynolds wanted her to go to the police to lodge the complaint, and I think would have been supportive. I do think that Linda Reynolds, from what we know, did everything according to the book on this one, but what she didn't do was tell the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister's very angry about this. He effectively rebuked her in the Parliament. Whether that's justified, I doubt that it is in a way, because yes, the Prime Minister should know what's going on, but also, as Linda Reynolds said, she was protecting the woman's privacy. Well, if you say, yes, I'll keep this private, and then run off and tell the Prime Minister's office, that's not really protecting the privacy, is it?
No, and of course therein lies some of the challenges in these situations. Do you think that this particular issue has been damaging to Scott Morrison in the context of his government?
I think it has, and I don't think it's over yet. I think he's struggled to find a line on this. He said early on that he'd been talking to Jenny, his wife, and that she'd said, well, think of it if it was our daughters. And of course this was met with a lot of cynicism when it came out publicly, when he made these comments. So it's such a sensitive issue, the particular issue, the wider area of the treatment of women in the workplace, and especially the parliamentary workplace, where there's been a lot of talk about a toxic environment. Now, Scott Morrison set up some 3 inquiries this week, and yesterday he announced that next week there'd be, I think, 3 councillors in Parliament House if staff or MPs felt they needed them. So he's tried to have a sort of blitz reaction, but I don't think he's got the thing right. And there's also the question of what his office knew and when they knew it. Now, he says he only knew Monday this week, and that his staff only knew Friday last week. But of course, one staffer in his office was Chief of Staff to Linda Reynolds at the time, so she obviously knew everything about this and didn't pass it on. Also presumably thought that this was in the interests of the woman's privacy, and now there's a suggestion that others could have known, and so I think that if any more comes out showing that people in his office new, then that's even worse for him. He's also made a very odd distinction with this staff member, his current staff member, saying, well, if you're in one office and then go to another office, you don't talk about what happened in the first one. Well, that just seems a bit of an odd justification to be running.
Yeah, that seems a very strange one.
A new convention, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it certainly makes sense in the context of political discussions, but when it comes to effectively human rights discussions,
but I think that the staff certainly could argue the privacy thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are very challenging times, and do you think that the Prime Minister has shown the appropriate level of leadership in this? I mean, you've talked about a blitz of things this week, but that seems to be a reaction rather than leadership. Well,
it is a reaction, and I think we should concede that it's very difficult to know what is the right thing to do in these circumstances, because clearly what's happened, I think, is less about the process that was followed and more about the fact that this young woman now feels that she needs to come out publicly, revisit the issue, and obviously it's been a long-lasting trauma, as you would expect. But she still has to decide whether she lodges a complaint to the police about this matter. And while the investigation is being described as open, it's not active until she lodges that complaint.
So I suspect we'll be hearing more about this one over the coming weeks and months.
I think we will. Certainly, Parliament's sitting next week, so certainly next week.
And then, on a completely different note, a fascinating turn of events around Facebook. So just as the government is looking to pass the media bargaining laws, it's just gone to the House of Representatives, I believe, Facebook decided to pull all local and international news from its feeds. In doing so, actually managed to block a whole range of feeds that were nothing to do with the news and caused quite a furore in that context. And the question that I think people are looking at, internationally, Australia is leading in this space, but internationally these sort of issues are coming to the fore in many, many jurisdictions. Do you think this is a bit of brinkmanship? Do you think Facebook's trying to make a special case of Australia to warn other governments?
Well, yes, I think it doesn't want a precedent set. This is all about Facebook, the big tech giants, paying for news, and this is important, of course, to a cash-strapped news sector in Australia. The government's pretty determined on this. I don't think they'll be retreating. And I don't think that Facebook's done itself the slightest bit of good by this action, because, as you say, it picked up all these sites that provide vital information. For example, state health authorities, government authorities, and this is at a time of a pandemic when you're about to have the vaccine rolled out. So that wouldn't be a very popular move with the community, and Scott Morrison's determined to hold the line and is indeed talking to other leaders, international leaders, on the issue. Yeah,
and I think you mentioned there the vaccine piece and the impact the Facebook blocks had on the communication with the community. But of course that vaccine rollout is just beginning now. Frontline workers and aged care workers and those in aged care facilities are now on the first rollout. Do you think Scott Morrison is going to be breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief that it's started and that it's beginning, or do you think he's still got concerns?
He knows that it's a very, very big logistical exercise, and there's always the potential for glitches. I think it'll go successfully overall, but whether it goes fast enough and whether there are problems along the way, you'd expect that in something so extensive, it won't be all smooth. But he's certainly breathing a sigh of relief in that we've got a stream of vaccines coming. We don't have many cases, and so we should be able to get this protection quite effectively and quite soon. We don't know exactly how adequate that protection will be, but we do remain in an excellent place compared to so many other countries.
Absolutely, and with relatives abroad, I'm particularly aware of how lucky we are here and how well we've managed it. Now, if I just look to the last one, the government has abandoned some of the aspects of its amendments to the Fair Work legislation, particularly, I think, taking account of crossbench and backbench considerations in respect of the Better Off Overall test. Do you think that's the last hurdle to get this through, or do you think there's more discussions and perhaps fights ahead?
They had to call a halt on the so-called boot test because clearly the crossbench weren't going to wear it, and indeed One Nation said, well, if you want negotiations on the whole bill, you better get rid of this now. And within a day that had in fact been done. But I think that the government will still have quite a battle on some of the other aspects of the bill. You would have to believe that it's in a reasonably good place to get the bill through, but I do think that it'll be a bill that will have more changes as the debate goes on. There's a Senate report to come, and then of course the Senate debate, and there's a lot of pressure from the union movement to make more changes, and Labor's still opposing the legislation. So it'll be a watered down version, already watered down, but more water being poured on it, I think, as time goes on.
And I have a sense, as you've just suggested, the unions and obviously Labour opposing it, that this may start to become one of those election issues that ramps up about Fair Work. Do you have a sense that that's playing out?
I think that the government is determined from its point of view that it'll make itself as small a target as possible on the industrial relations area, because it's always prickly ground for it to have to fight on. But Labor, of course, as we saw last week, wants to make this a central issue at the election. It's got policy out there, probably will have more policy in the area before too long. And so, yes, industrial relations will be an election issue. Labor will say we want a fairer playing field, and it will say, okay, the Liberals might have abandoned a few things on the way through, but really they want to do those things. If they're re-elected, they'll come back to them. That'll be how the fight is framed.
Well, look, a fascinating week this week, and I can only see it being no different in the weeks to come. So thank you very much for that, Michelle. Very insightful as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paddy.